Welcome to Imperial History, the podcast where we explore the epic stories of empires that shaped the world, from their triumphant rises to their dramatic falls. I'm your host, Eric Alexander. Today, we start our series on the last war of Antiquity, fought between the Roman and Sasanian empires. One point of clarification moving forward: modern historians refer to the Romans during this period as the Byzantines. To avoid confusion, I'll do the same. Imagine the late 6th century, a world of empires locked in a tense equilibrium, where every decision, every battle, every alliance could shift the balance of power. The Byzantine Empire to the west and the Sasanian Empire to the east were the towering colossi of their age, shadowing all others. Their rivalry was more than a clash of armies. It was a competition of civilizations, religions, and ambitions that had simmered for centuries. In this opening chapter, we set the stage for one of the most consequential conflicts of late antiquity, the Byzantine-Sasanian War of 602 to 628. By the late 6th century, the Byzantine Empire was both a shadow of Rome's former glory and a formidable force in its own right. Stretching from the Balkans to North Africa, it was a realm of contrasts. Wealth flowed into Constantinople, its glittering capital, from the Mediterranean trade networks, even as provincial economies struggled under heavy taxation. The empire had weathered crises in the past, but its survival often hinged on the competence of its rulers. Enter Emperor Maurice, a man whose name might not be as familiar as Julius Caesar's or Constantine's, but whose reign was pivotal in shaping the Byzantine world. Maurice ascended the throne in 582, inheriting an empire fraught with challenges. The Balkan frontier was under relentless assault by Slavic and Avar tribes, while the eastern border simmered with the ever-present threat of the Sasanians. Yet Maurice was no ordinary ruler. He was a soldier first and foremost, a man forged in the crucible of battle. Rising through the ranks of the Byzantine military, Maurice's campaigns against the Persians had earned him respect and acclaim. As emperor, he sought to apply the discipline and strategy of the battlefield to governance. His military reforms, including the establishment of a defensive frontier system and reorganization of provincial forces, were ahead of their time. But Maurice's reign was not without turmoil. Economic pressures weighed heavily on his subjects. To fund his military campaigns and reforms, Maurice imposed stringent taxes, a decision that, while necessary for the empire's survival, sowed seeds of discontent. This tension would prove critical in the unfolding drama. To the east, the Sasanian Empire was no less magnificent. It was a land of vast wealth due to its control of key trade routes, including the Silk Road, which connected it to both Byzantine and distant eastern markets. And, like its rival, the Sasanian Empire in the late 6th century was riddled with internal challenges. The Sasanian Empire retained significant military and administrative strengths. Its cavalry, particularly the elite cataphracts, were among the most formidable forces of the ancient world. The empire also maintained a robust system of provincial governance, allowing it to mobilize resources effectively during times of crisis. However, the dependence on powerful regional nobles sometimes undermined centralized authority, a weakness that would resurface during prolonged conflicts. For centuries, the Byzantine and Sasanian empires had been locked in a complex dance of war and diplomacy. At times, they were bitter enemies; at others, reluctant allies against mutual threats, such as nomadic incursions from the Huns or internal revolts. By the late 6th century, however, their relationship had solidified into near-permanent hostility. The borderlands of Armenia, Mesopotamia, and the Caucasus became perpetual battlegrounds, where each side sought to assert dominance. The Byzantine-Sasanian rivalry was, in many ways, a cold war of the ancient world. For over a century, the two empires had skirmished along their shared border, each wary of the other's ambitions. Yet, they were also deeply interconnected, trading goods, ideas, and even military tactics. This complex relationship added layers of intrigue to their conflicts, making each confrontation a high-stakes chess game. The winner of these chess matches was often determined by the kind of king each side possessed. When we think about the great leaders of antiquity, we often imagine them in their moments of triumph. But what happens when a king is cast out, forced to live as a fugitive in a foreign land? The story of Khosrow II, during his time in exile, is a tale of desperation, diplomacy, and resilience that ultimately reshaped the course of history. The early years of Khosrow II's life were marked by chaos. His father, Hormizd IV, had ruled with a heavy hand, alienating nobles and military commanders alike. This discontent culminated in a coup led by the formidable general Bahram Chobin, who deposed Hormizd and declared himself king. Khosrow, then a young prince, was forced into exile, seeking refuge in an unlikely quarter, the Byzantine court. Fleeing Ctesiphon with a small band of loyal supporters, Khosrow crossed the border into Byzantine territory. It was a desperate gamble. For a Sasanian king to seek asylum in the court of his empire's traditional rival was almost unthinkable. But for Khosrow, it was his only chance to reclaim his throne. Imagine the scene when Khosrow arrived at the gates of a Byzantine stronghold. Here was a Persian king, disheveled and on the run, pleading for help from an empire that had been locked in conflict with his own for centuries. But Khosrow was no ordinary refugee. He carried with him the gravitas of his lineage and the promise of strategic opportunity. When news of Khosrow's arrival reached Emperor Maurice, the Byzantine ruler saw an extraordinary opportunity. Maurice was a seasoned strategist who understood the value of having a Sasanian king in his debt. The two leaders met, and an agreement was struck. Maurice would provide Khosrow with military support, including a contingent of Byzantine troops to help him reclaim his throne. In return, Khosrow pledged significant concessions. He agreed to cede several border territories, including the strategic cities of Dara and Martyropolis, to Byzantium. These gains not only strengthened Byzantine control over the frontier, but also gave Maurice a significant propaganda victory. Additionally, Khosrow promised a formal alliance, ensuring peace between the two empires for the foreseeable future. For Maurice, it was a masterstroke of diplomacy and strategy. It was a calculated risk for both men, but one that would pay off in the short term. What made this rivalry so enduring was its symmetry. Both empires were sophisticated, centralized states with professional armies and well-defined ambitions. They mirrored each other in strength and resilience, creating a balance of power that neither could decisively break. The introduction of Khosrow II and Maurice's alliance briefly altered this balance, as the Sasanians leaned on Byzantine support to stabilize their internal chaos. The alliance was not only a brief but remarkable interlude in this rivalry, it demonstrated the pragmatic nature of ancient diplomacy, where enemies could become allies when circumstances demanded it. However, this cooperation was fragile and would ultimately collapse, leading to one of the most devastating wars of the ancient world. In early 591, Maurice dispatched his generals to lead the expeditionary force alongside Khosrow II and his loyalist forces. Chief among them was Narses, a capable commander entrusted with a task that would test the limits of Byzantine strategy and logistics. The campaign required navigating the rugged terrains of Mesopotamia, a region marked by rivers, deserts, and fortified cities. This was no easy task. Bahram Chobin was a skilled military leader who commanded the loyalty of a majority of the Sasanian army. The Byzantine army, well-trained and disciplined, faced a mix of challenges. Skirmishes with Bahram's forces tested their resolve, while the long supply lines and the constant threat of ambushes demanded ingenuity. The alliance with Khosrow also required delicate diplomacy, as local Persian lords and tribal leaders had to be persuaded or coerced into supporting the exiled prince. The campaign saw the capture of several key cities, including Nisibis and Arbela. Khosrow's forces moved methodically, consolidating their gains and ensuring that loyal governors were installed in reclaimed territories. Meanwhile, Narses and his Byzantine contingent demonstrated remarkable discipline, avoiding unnecessary devastation and focusing on the strategic objectives set by Maurice. The pivotal moment of the campaign occurred at the Battle of Blarathon. Thinking he could catch the overstretched army of Narses and Khosrow deep in enemy territory off guard, Bahram attacked with a smaller force. The Byzantines played a decisive role, employing superior tactics and disciplined formations to outflank and rout Bahram's forces. This victory not only broke Bahram's military power, but also sent a strong signal to wavering Sasanian nobles and Zoroastrian clergy that Khosrow's cause was ascendant. This triumph was as much a testament to the strategic planning of Maurice and Narses as it was to Khosrow's determination. The final push into the capital was swift and relatively bloodless as Bahram fled into obscurity. His victory was a dramatic reversal of fortune, transforming him from a fugitive to a monarch restored by the combined efforts of his allies and his own resilience. The return to Ctesiphon, the Sassanid capital, was a spectacle steeped in symbolism. Khosrow, adorned in royal regalia, entered the city as the legitimate Shahanshah, accompanied by Byzantine banners as a stark reminder of the partnership that had restored him. But Khosrow's return was not just a personal victory. It also marked a significant shift in the geopolitical landscape. For Maurice, the rewards were immediate and tangible. The territorial concessions solidified Byzantine dominance along the eastern frontier, creating a buffer zone that would secure the empire's borders for years to come. Additionally, Maurice's role in restoring Khosrow enhanced his reputation as a shrewd and capable ruler. Khosrow's indebtedness to Maurice was a double-edged sword. While the Sasanian king owed his throne to Byzantine intervention, the very notion of a Persian ruler beholden to a foreign power was a delicate matter. Among his court and subjects, whispers of Byzantine influence bred suspicion. Similarly, Maurice's court questioned the wisdom of investing so heavily in a neighbor whose enmity was historically inevitable. Nevertheless, Khosrow's gratitude toward Maurice initially ensured a period of peace between the two empires, a rare and valuable respite in their centuries-long rivalry. The alliance between the two great powers stood for about a decade, until the death of Maurice. Roman emperors rarely died on a battlefield, and like many emperors before him, Maurice would die at the hands of other Romans. The fall of an emperor is rarely a quiet affair. When we think of the Byzantine Empire, its grandeur, its intrigue, its staggering complexity, we imagine a machine running on a knife's edge. One misstep, one wrong decision, and the gears grind to a halt, sparking chaos. That chaos consumed Emperor Maurice, a man whose ambition and reforms held his empire together, until they didn't. Maurice inherited an empire that was teetering on the edge of financial collapse. Decades of warfare in Italy against the Sasanians and other adversaries had drained the treasury. The tax base was also significantly reduced due to the drop in population following the Justinian plague. Maintaining the empire's vast army, its bureaucratic apparatus, and the defences of its sprawling borders required an enormous amount of resources. Compounding the problem was the costly tribute paid to the Avars to keep them from attacking, a short-term solution that only emboldened the Avars to demand more. The Avars weren't just a nuisance. They were a mortal threat to the empire's northern frontier. A confederation of nomadic tribes, the Avars were fierce, mobile, and opportunistic. They controlled vast swathes of the Balkans and frequently raided Byzantine territory, plundering towns, enslaving populations, and disrupting trade. Maurice's policy of paying them off had only brought temporary peace. By the late 580s and early 590s, the Avars had grown bolder, launching large-scale invasions that threatened key Byzantine strongholds. Maurice knew that if the Avars weren't contained, they could overrun critical regions and undermine the empire's ability to defend itself. To address these issues, Maurice became almost obsessive about saving money. By 602, discontent simmered across the Byzantine territories, fueled by his austere cost-cutting measures. The emperor's fiscal discipline, while aimed at stabilizing the empire's finances, alienated key segments of society, particularly the military. Soldiers along the empire's volatile frontiers, especially in the Balkans, bore the brunt of these reforms. His reforms were aimed at making the military more efficient and the administration leaner. He reduced pay for soldiers and cut back on the provisioning of armies, insisting that they live off the land during campaigns. For Maurice, this was a necessary evil to ensure the long-term survival of the empire. But for the soldiers, it was a betrayal, a disregard for the hardships they endured in defense of the state. In the Balkans, Byzantine forces were locked in a grueling campaign against the Avars. The Avars' tactics of hit-and-run raids and relentless pressure kept the Byzantine forces on edge. Maurice, seeking to save costs, ordered his troops to winter beyond the Danube. This decision was made with cold logic. The soldiers could forage locally and reduce the financial burden on the imperial treasury, but it was a breaking point. Hungry, cold, and weary, the soldiers' morale shattered. Discontent transformed into outright rebellion, and whispers of mutiny grew louder. Byzantine soldiers, exhausted from months of campaigning, found themselves stationed in enemy territory during one of the harshest winters on record. Communication between Maurice and his officers was strained. Reports of inadequate supplies and poor morale flooded in, but Maurice's response, always rooted in discipline, was to double down. He issued orders for the men to hold their positions, viewing retreat as a sign of weakness. This, of course, ignored the reality on the ground. Officers in the field, already frustrated by a lack of resources, found themselves caught between loyalty to the emperor and the fury of their men. Desertions became increasingly common, and whispers of rebellion began to circulate in the camps. Soldiers who had once fought loyally for the empire now openly questioned whether Maurice deserved their loyalty at all. The civilian population also felt the weight of Maurice's austerity. Heavy taxation, combined with crop failures in some provinces, led to widespread hardship. Urban centres, once vibrant hubs of trade and culture, began to feel the strain of declining commerce and rising social unrest. Food shortages, increased taxes, and a lack of public works created a volatile mix. Maurice's reputation as a cold and calculating ruler only added fuel to the fire. He was seen not as a protector of the people, but as a distant bureaucrat, more concerned with balancing the empire's books than addressing its human cost. Maurice's reforms, though well-intentioned, were poorly timed and unevenly implemented, leaving him isolated from both the elites and the common people. At the heart of Maurice's troubles lay his inability to bridge the gap between his lofty ideals and the harsh realities faced by his empire. The populace, burdened by heavy taxes, resented his frugality, while the military saw his policies as a betrayal of their sacrifices. In the swirling discontent, the seeds of revolution were sown. Rebellion erupted in 602 when the Danube army mutinied, abandoning their posts and marching south toward Constantinople. This mutiny was no spontaneous outburst. It reflected years of frustration and neglect. Among the rebels emerged a leader, Phocas, a low-ranking officer whose charisma and ambition resonated with the disgruntled soldiers. Phocas was an unlikely revolutionary, lacking noble lineage or significant military achievements. Yet, in the chaos of the moment, he embodied the soldiers' anger and desperation. The march on Constantinople was swift and unrelenting, catching Maurice unprepared. The emperor, besieged by his enemies and betrayed by his own subjects, fled the capital with his family, seeking refuge in Nicomedia. Phocas's ascension to power was marked by a rapid breakdown of Byzantine political stability. As the mutineers stormed the capital, factions within Constantinople quickly aligned themselves with the rebels, seeking to secure their own positions in the new regime. Maurice's few remaining allies were unable to muster any meaningful resistance. But refuge would not come. Phocas seized power in a brutal coup, crowning himself emperor. What followed was a chilling display of vengeance. Maurice and his family were captured and executed. The execution of Maurice's children, carried out before his eyes, was an act of cruelty that reverberated throughout the empire. This grim spectacle was intended to solidify Phocas's authority, but instead sowed fear and resentment among the populace. Phocas's reign began under a cloud of violence and uncertainty. His support among the military was tenuous, built on shared dissatisfaction rather than genuine loyalty. Meanwhile, the Byzantine aristocracy viewed him as an illegitimate usurper, further undermining his position. The age of Maurice's reforms and alliances was over, replaced by an era of blood and turmoil. The news of Maurice's fall travelled swiftly, crossing the borders into the Sasanian Empire. For Khosrow II, it was more than the loss of an ally. It was the betrayal of a benefactor. Maurice had restored Khosrow to the Sasanian throne, securing his place in history as a kingmaker. Now, the man who had been instrumental in Khosrow's rise was gone, his death a symbol of Byzantine instability. Khosrow saw an opportunity to act, not merely for vengeance, but to reshape the balance of power. He framed his response as a quest for justice, presenting himself as the avenger of a fallen ally. Yet beneath the rhetoric lay deeper motives: territorial ambitions, the allure of Byzantine wealth, and the desire to exploit a weakened enemy. The Sasanian monarch's decision to declare war was also deeply political within his own empire. By invoking the memory of Maurice, Khosrow sought to rally his nobles and military commanders around a unifying cause. The narrative of avenging a benefactor's murder gave moral legitimacy to what was, in essence, a campaign of conquest. In our next episode, we'll examine the reign of Phocas, a soldier turned emperor whose rule was as brutal as it was short-lived. How did this once celebrated savior become a symbol of tyranny? We'll explore the civil strife that tore Byzantium apart, the diplomatic breakdowns that followed, and the invasion by an old ally turned enemy, Khosrow II of Persia. As the Byzantine-Sasanian War erupts, the stakes grow higher, the consequences more devastating. Cities will burn, armies will clash, and the stage will be set for one of the greatest transformations in world history.